Claire's voice carried differently than anyone expected. Not because of what she said, but because of the silence that followed it. You're not supposed to be here, yet you are standing in the hollow between the words no one has ever dared to ask. Asterisk, what if the accent they mocked was never hers to begin with? Her story has always been whispered in fragments, dismissed as a misunderstanding. A nervous slip, an immigrant's tongue fumbling for balance, but I need you to pay attention, because the moment you look away, the truth rearranges itself and people who once existed stop appearing in photographs. It began in a dim lecture hall in Boston, where a visiting professor adjusted his glasses and froze mid. He was introducing her, reading her name from a card, when his face drained of color. He whispered something under his breath. Syllables none of us could catch, and then he was gone. Not in the clumsy way of fainting or stumbling, but gone, as though the space he once occupied had never been real. Students gasped, chairs scraped against the floor. And someone swore they heard a baby's voice echo from the back row, calling a name no one admitted knowing. Claire stood at the podium, perfectly still, her accent thick, her eyes wide. And for the first time I saw something in her expression that didn't belong to the present moment. You can dismiss this as rumor, a glitch of memory. But explain why his office was cleared out before the police even filed a report. Or why the university scrubbed his lectures from every archive. Explain why Claire's accent, the one people joked about behind her back, began shifting week after week, bending into something familiar, yet as though she were reciting from a script written long before she was born. Some claimed her vowels carried echoes of cities that no longer existed. Others swore they heard voices behind hers, layered like a chorus trying to speak through her throat. And then came the night. Everything changed. The UN session broadcast live across the world. Millions tuned in, expecting policy, another forgettable speech buried in protocol. But when Claire approached the microphone, the chamber grew so quiet it was as if sound itself had been erased. She began in her usual halting accent, each word trembling on the edge of ridicule, until halfway through her sentence, the tone dropped, the rhythm shifted, and an old man's voice, one who had been dead for decades, finished her thought. Delegates froze, translators pulled off their headsets, and one ambassador clutched his chest, whispering the same forbidden name the vanished professor had spoken. You think this is coincidence, but answer me this. Why did the live stream cut to static only in certain countries? Why were there no official transcripts of her words? Only silence recorded in the official record. And why, when I called the number she left on her handwritten notes, did a child's voice answer, asking me in perfect English if I remembered the door? I never told anyone about the door. So now you tell me if this was never Claire's accent, whose voice was the world really hearing. The child's voice on the other end of the line still rings in my ear. Asterisk. Do you remember the door? Asterisk, but I cannot find any proof that the call happened. My phone log shows nothing. My voicemail is empty. And when I scroll back through my contacts, the number Claire scribbled down no longer exists. I tried dialing it anyway, out of some desperate instinct. But the recording that played was not the usual automated message. It was grainy, distorted, like something recorded on a cassette decades ago. A woman's voice came through, heavy with static, whispering my full name. The way only my mother used to say it when she wanted to wake me from nightmares. Only my mother has been dead for 12 years! 4 nights after, I kept replaying what happened at the UN, trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined it, but every replay of the broadcast glitches at the same spot mid-sentence, just before Claire's voice shifts. The screen wavers. A low hum fills the room, and then silence. On the news clips that aired the next day, the glitch isn't there. In those, she finishes her speech with no interruptions, no strange voices, no sudden silence. The official record says nothing unusual happened, which leaves me with a choice. Either every outlet, every recording, every archive is lying, or my own mind is betraying me, fabricating something that never occurred. I told myself it was stress, the way trauma feeds on itself when you're vulnerable. My therapist once said, memory is never a recording, only a story we tell ourselves to stay whole. But what if that is exactly how they erase the things we were not supposed to know? What if the truth is always disguised as madness? That's when Matthew showed up. He said he worked in media preservation at the university, though I'd never seen his name before. He was tall, gaunt, with restless eyes that didn't seem to blink enough, and he carried a box of cassette tapes like they weighed nothing. He told me he had footage from the UN session, the raw feed, unedited, unarchived, and that if I wanted to see what really happened, I'd have to listen in a room with no windows. I didn't trust him. I still don't! There was something off about the way he talked, the way his sentences trailed into pauses as if waiting for me to fill in the blanks. But paranoia does strange things, and doubt is a hunger that never starves. Against better judgment, I followed him. The room he led me to smelled like dust and mold, the kind of air that clings to you. He set down an old tape deck, slid in one of the cassettes, and pressed play. At first, it was only the expected. Claire's voice trembling as she began, her accent thick and uncertain. Then, the audio warped, stretched like melted film. A second voice layered underneath hers. Deep and ancient. Not in English, but in something that made my skin crawl with recognition. As if I had heard it once in childhood and buried it ever since. Do you hear it? Matthew asked, but I couldn't answer. Because right then, I realized the voice beneath Claire's wasn't alone. There were others. Dozens, maybe hundreds, whispering over each other like a tide of echoes. Some in languages I didn't recognize, others calling words I knew too well. My name, my mother's name, the street I grew up on. I pulled off the headphones, shaking. Matthew just stared at me, his lips twitching like he wanted to smile but couldn't. They don't let people hear this, he said. They don't want you to remember. But when I demanded to see the tape again, to prove I wasn't unraveling, the cassette was blank. No voices, no distortion, just static. I accused him of tricking me, but he only looked confused. Swore he'd heard it too. The more he insisted, the less I believed him. Maybe that was his role all along, not to show me the truth, but to drown me in doubt until I couldn't tell if he was ally, enemy, or a symptom of my own collapse. That night, I dreamed of the door. Not a specific door. Just a red frame with peeling paint, standing alone in an empty field. Behind it, I could hear voices pressing against the wood, begging me to open it. When I woke, my hands smelled like rust, and there was dirt beneath my fingernails. In the days that followed, I noticed small breaks in reality. Conversations I swore I'd had with friends, only for them to insist they never happened. Photographs on my phone rearranging themselves, people in different clothes, a background shifting slightly, a shadow where no one should be standing. And always, at the edge of the recordings, a faint hum, like someone breathing just behind me. Matthew called once more, his voice frantic, telling me he'd found another tape. But when I played the voicemail back, it was empty, only silence. The call log showed nothing. I tried to convince myself he was real, that I hadn't invented him, but when I went back to the university, no one knew his name. No record of his employment, no trace of him in the archives. And yet, tucked in my jacket pocket, I found a cassette labeled in shaky handwriting. Boston lecture, Hall first vanishing. I've been too afraid to play it, because here's the question that haunts me now. The one no one wants to ask. What if Claire S.'s accent isn't a flaw? Not something mocked or misunderstood, but a signal. A code threaded into her voice, calling out to those who've forgotten something they were forced to bury. And what if the door isn't a metaphor at all, but real waiting for the one who finally dares to open it? The cassette sits on my desk as I write this, the label staring back at me. If I press play, I might find proof of everything, or I might hear nothing but static and confirm that I've lost my mind. But there's a part of me, the part that hasn't slept in weeks, that already knows the sound on that tape. It's the same voice that answered when I called Claire's number, the same voice that asked if I remembered the door. And if I press play, if I let that voice speak again, I'm terrified it won't just remind me. I'm terrified it will finish what it started. I thought the cassette would break me, but when I finally pressed play, the sound that poured through the old tape deck was ordinary! No hidden voices layered beneath the static. No whispers of my name or my mother's. Just Claire's voice, steady and deliberate, delivering her lecture in Boston before the professor vanished. She was clear, articulate, her accent gentler than I remembered, almost polished. Listening to her, I felt foolish, ashamed of the paranoia that had eaten me alive. The air in the room seemed lighter, my breathing steadier, as if the burden had been lifted all at once. Maybe it was all a fabrication, a cruel trick of exhaustion and grief. My mind replaying shadows until I believed them to be truths. For the first time in weeks, I thought, maybe it's over. That night, I slept without dreams. Or I thought I did. In the morning, a folded piece of paper lay on the kitchen counter. Written in my handwriting, though I don't recall touching a pen. 4 words. Asterisk, don't trust the silence. I tried to laugh it off. A half-asleep scribble, a joke my mind had played on itself. But when I went back to the cassette, the tape had changed. The label no longer read asterisk, Boston Lecture Hall First Vanishing. It now said Remember Chicago. The name alone was enough to crack open something I had buried. Chicago, 1999. I was a child then, 7 years old, visiting my aunt, while my parents argued about selling the house. That summer, there was a boy in the neighborhood who disappeared, freckled, red hair. The kind of kid who always carried a yo-yo. They said he wandered into an abandoned school and never came out. I hadn't thought about him in decades, but as I held the tape in my hand, flashes came rushing back. The sound of laughter echoing through empty hallways. A teacher's voice on the intercom, even though the school had been shut down for years. And me, small and trembling, staring at a locked red door on the 3rd floor, hearing whispers pressing against the wood. When I asked my aunt later, she swore no such school existed. Yet, when the police searched for David, I remember standing outside with the other kids, staring at the building as men in uniforms went in and came out empty. By the time the story hit the news, the location had changed. They said David drowned in the lake, that no one saw him after sundown. The abandoned school was never mentioned again, but I know what I saw. I know because I can still feel the cold handle of that red door in my palm. The way it burned like ice when I touched it. I convinced myself this tape was proof. Maybe whoever was behind all of this had been watching me since childhood, planting these fractures in my memory. The thought should have terrified me, but instead, it steadied me. If there was a connection between Claire's voice and David's vanishing, between the red door then and the red door now, it meant I wasn't imagining it. There was a pattern, a hidden truth. Maybe I could finally uncover it. I played the tape again. At first, it was silent. Nothing but the low hum of the machine. Then a faint sound emerged, like chalk dragging across a board. Slowly, it became words. Do you remember? Over and over, the same phrase, looping until my skin crawled. And then, beneath the repetition, a child's laugh. I slammed stop, my chest tight, but I couldn't stop shaking. The laugh was David's. I hadn't heard it in over 20 years, but every note, every cadence was exactly as I remembered. I thought the resolution had come at last, that this was the evidence no one could deny. I grabbed my laptop, ready to record the tape, to upload it, to force the world to hear what I had heard. But when I pressed play again, the laugh was gone. Only Claire's lecture filled the room, flawless, untouched. When I checked the audio file I had captured, the recording was blank, as if my microphone had gone deaf. I replayed it again and again, until I could no longer tell which memory was real. The lecture, the laugh, or the silence. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. In the background of the lecture, almost buried beneath her words, was a sound I recognized, not from memory, but from somewhere deeper. Breathing. Slow, deliberate, and close. Not hers, not mine, but something waiting on the other side of the tape. Patient as stone. I leaned in, holding my breath, and for a fraction of a second, I heard it shift closer, sharper, almost as if it were behind me, instead of in the recording. I spun around. The room was empty, but the door, the one leading to the hall, was slightly open, though I remember locking it. And I swear on everything I have left, the air smelled faintly of rust, like blood on iron. I told myself this was trauma resurfacing, a memory glitch tying the past to the present. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't just about Claire or David. This had been circling me all my life, watching, testing the edges of my mind until I questioned myself into silence. Maybe it had been there even before me, bleeding through generations, weaving itself into the gaps of our family stories. I thought the answer was in Claire's accent, in the voices beneath her words. But what if she was only a vessel? Another child who touched the handle of the red door and never truly walked away? What if the real danger wasn't the voices at all, but the silence between them, the gaps where memory falters, where we convince ourselves it was just a dream? The false resolution shattered in that moment. I hadn't found the truth. I had only stepped deeper into its trap, because as I stood in the half-open doorway, heart hammering, I saw something impossible. A photograph nailed to the inside of the doorframe, one I swear wasn't there before. It was a class picture, faded and yellowed, from an elementary school I don't remember attending. Children lined up in rows, their faces blurred with age. But in the back, near the teacher, there I was, 7 years old, hand resting on a boy's shoulder. David's. And if you look closely now, if you really let yourself see, you'll notice one more detail. Behind us, half-shadowed, just visible through the window in the photograph, is the red door. The same one I swore I only dreamed. The same one that has been waiting. The same one that means you have to go back and question everything you thought you understood about this story, because the truth isn't in what I told you. It's in what I didn't. They began to arrive at my door, like weather quiet at first, a pressure against the windows that made the hair at the back of my neck stand up. Then a steady, undeniable storm that proved I was not alone, that whatever had been watching me had been watching others as well. The first came on a gray Tuesday, a plain envelope taped to my mailbox with no return address, and inside a single Polaroid stuck to a page torn from a notebook. The photo was of a playground swing set taken at dusk. The sky bruised purple, and someone had drawn in the same shaky blue ink a small spiral on the bottom right corner of the picture and written beneath it, "You were right all along." I laughed then, the sound brittle and too loud in the empty kitchen, convincing myself it was a prank, until I found another envelope the next morning, folded beneath my doormat, a photocopy of the same Polaroid, though this one had a different scribble across the back. A series of numbers that matched nothing I could place but which, when I typed them into a search, out of some private mania, brought up an old bulletin board thread where strangers traded nothing but fragments. A child-esque drawing of a red door, a grainy frame from a school play with a shadow in the back row, a voicemail recorded in 2004 that played the word remember backward until it sounded like a prayer. The thread had been archived, years ago, with a note pasted across the top in all caps. What the government never released? The header made me dizzy. Not because I believed governments would be involved, but because the sentence felt less like provocation and more like confirmation. Like someone else was saying what I had been trying to admit to myself for weeks. That memory was not private, and that someone had been curating the fractures. Then the dreams started to sink, as if the city itself had been given a calendar, and we all received the same invitation. On different nights in apartments, blocks far from each other, people I did not know woke screaming with the same image embedded behind their eyes. An auditorium lit by a single low lamp, a woman at a microphone reading something that became someone else and a red door offstage that opened to reveal not a corridor, but an impossible corridor that folded back on itself. They said later in hushed apologetic messages that they had woken with the taste of iron on their tongues and a single phrase burning in their mouths like a brand new. You remember the hinge? And when they wrote to me, because once the thread had gathered momentum, we became decoders of each other's madness. They sent screenshots of dream logs they had kept for years, paragraphs typed in the 2 a.m. light where handwriting dissolved into desperate looping ellipses. Some of them were teachers, some were postal workers. A woman in Ohio who collected vinyl records and swore she had never met Claire, but had the same cassette tucked under her mattress, labeled only with a red X. I learned their first names slowly, like reading a map by candlelight. Denise, who worked nights at a nursing home and carried a faded classroom photo in her wallet, where a child she'd never known had his hand on the shoulder of a boy named David. Aaron, who had reconstructed the UN feed frame by frame until he found a single pixel that did not belong and sent it to me as proof that the silence I had heard was not private but broadcast ready and masked. And then there was Evelyn, who called herself an archivist, and whose voice had the precise bored weariness of someone who had been given access to rooms. No one else could enter, and had stayed behind the rope to listen. Evelyn's messages were different from the rest because she wrote like someone naming objects on a table. Precise, clinical, but with an undercurrent of grief that made everything she touched feel suddenly breakable. Her first email began with a confession, which was how I came to trust her more than anyone. I have been watching this for a long time. Longer than you have been alive. But watching does not mean understanding. She attached a file that the university servers refused to deliver at first, a corrupted, AVI-labeled, found footage from 20 years. AGO labeled, and when I opened it, the image wavered like a reflection on water, but then steadied into a classroom scene that had no business existing, the same chipped red door at the back. Children arranged in rows as if timed portraits were being taken, and in the lower corner a date stamp that read, August 17th, 2005, though the resolution suggested something far older. Evelyn said the tape had been pulled from a box that should never have been cataloged. A box with an accession number that returned a dead end in the university's digital inventory. Because someone had intervened and redacted the entry. She told me calmly that she had been the one who found the spiral symbol carved into the film canister. A tiny etched mark that matched the spirals cropping up on the Polaroids in the margins of the notebooks that people kept sending each other like torches. This symbol is how they communicate, she wrote. Or how they once communicated to people who still listen. I watched the footage with headphones pressed hard over my ears until the room blurred. Not because the video was especially vivid, but because something in the cadence of the children's laughter matched a laugh I had tried to forget, and because in one frame blurred, but undeniable, a figure looked directly at the camera and opened their mouth, and when you slowed the playback and read it like a mouth opening, for the first time in decades the sound was a whisper. Threaded with something else, static memory, and a word that insisted on being decoded. Hinge. As the cluster of strangers became a network, we developed our own rituals. We began to leave each other breadcrumbs in the margins of the public world, a language that felt as old as folklore and as modern as a leaked email. One person would scratch a spiral into the wet cement of a new sidewalk and post a photo to the thread with coordinates. Another would leave a page torn from a book inside a library copy of a well-worn novel, where if you flipped to page 237, you would find a line circled in pen that nobody in the world would care about except the one who had been remembering incorrectly and needed a nudge. Sometimes the messages were kinder, a postcard with a simple sentence and a childish hand, remember the field behind the school, and sometimes they were sinister, like the voicemail left on my phone. That was a minute of silence. But at the 30-second mark, a soft, deliberate breath that sounded not like a human inhale, but like something testing the limit of the microphone. We learn to read these things the way sailors learn the weather, the way people who have lived through car crashes can predict the screech of brakes a block away. By pattern. It fed the paranoid part of me, the part that had once wanted to flee from my own house, but it also gave me a terror that was more precise than any nightmare had been because it was shared. We were not singular in our forgetting. We were a chorus of fractured memories, harmonizing with each other into something that suggested design. The third voice entered like a camera in a dark room. The person who might be telling the truth because they claimed to be outside the performance and yet knew every line. He called himself Jonah, and his perspective was the opposite of Evelyn's. Not archival cool, but urgent insurgent, the cadence of someone who had been awake for too many dawns and could no longer parse the difference between signal and delusion. Jonah insisted he had found his way to me the way people find leaks in levees, following a damp trail of overlooked details. A member of a city council who never existed on record but whose speech was listed in old minutes. A child taken from a hospital whose name had been redacted in the birth registry. A video clip from a local news broadcast in which the caption flickered to the word removed for half a second. And then, return to normal. He sent files with names like what? Dedunti? Want you to remember? And untitled do not publish that were watermarked with agency codes we could not trace and whose metadata had been scrubbed clean. Jonah wrote like a man who believed language could still be used as a net to catch truth. He wrote in lists, in directives. Watch the left side of frame, listen for breaths between words, remember what they say when they think no one is listening. He believed with a kind of fervor that made me uncomfortable and made me hopeful in equal measure. That the only way to fight what had been watching us was to turn watching back on it, to make the watchers feel observed, to create a mirror so bright it would fracture their patience. But mirrors break and reflections lie, and that was a lesson we learned when one of our own stopped answering. Denise, who had been the first to send me a scanned newspaper clipping about a child gone missing in Chicago, vanished from the thread as quietly as she had appeared. Her last message was an image of her palm with a small spiral faintly bruised into the skin, as if someone had pressed a coin against flesh too hard. Her apartment was found unlocked a week later with a kettle still warm on the stove and a chair pushed back from the table, as though she had risen only moments before. There was no sign of struggle, no notes, only a Polaroid on the counter with a sharply focused photograph of a red door and in the margins a single word written in the same handwriting as every envelope I had received. Remember. The police file on a disappearance contained a line that was either clerical error or deliberate erasure. It read, simply, subject relocated per protocol, and then a blank space that read like a mouthful of unspoken words. We argued. We tried to triangulate her last known coordinates with the photos and the times. But uncertainty is a predator that eats resolve and leaves doubt on the floor like teeth. Through all of it, one idea persisted in the small, beating center of the group. Identity was not fixed, that what we called self could be edited the way footage is edited. And that memory glitches those tiny ghosts that rearrange the furniture of an afternoon. Were the seams where the editing had been done. If you pulled at a seam, the rest of the cloth might unravel. If you stitched it back wrongly, you would only sew yourself into a different story. Jonah insisted that these were not accidents, but interventions. That the force watching us had learned how to move through language, through recordings, through the very devices we trusted to anchor our recollection, and that the only countermeasure was a communal remembering so violent in its fidelity. It could resist the edit. You were right all along. Someone wrote in a private message that felt more like a benediction than a sentence. We were always being prepared to remember. The phrase flared through our exchanges like a slogan that hid its terror behind comfort. The frame showed, half hidden by a cluster of out-of-focus people, a symbol carved into the wooden edge of the moderator's lectern. The spiral. Once again, innocuous until you realize the symbol was repeated in other historic footage. Always near the edges of events that later became censored or cleaned. He labeled one node simply, in heavy ink, origin, and then wrote, beneath it, smaller, as if afraid to fix the line with certainty. Or observatory, he told us, with the impatient certainty of someone who has begun to believe his own fear. That the more we watched, the more the pattern tightened, like a noose being woven from coordinates. His final message before the thread flickered into a slow, unexplained blackout that disappeared 100 messages into the feed was a single sentence that could be taken as both instruction and prophecy. So here we are, a loose congregation of people who met each other through the underside of the internet and through a series of Polaroids and shared nightmares, and the story we are living has become a relay race of glances and clues, a collective. Remember, game played against the force that knows the rules better than we do. There are more of us than I thought, and that is both the truest comfort and the most terrible warning. The force that has been watching is patient, and where there are many viewers, a emerges. That can be anticipated, contained, and finally, if it chooses we have become a network of witnesses, and witnesses can be annoying, persistent, and loud in the wrong way. But witnesses can also be dangerous to a watcher because witnesses refuse to be singular. They form a chorus that can, if it coordinates rightly, drown out edits. We do not yet know if coordination will save us, or if it will hand us over on a platter to the thing that tends to the hinges. We only know that we are no longer alone, and that the mark of the spiral is no longer just on objects, but on our knowing, lodged under our fingernails, like a splinter that will not come out. The thread hums with energy late into the night, now part prayer and part experiment. And sometimes, when the room grows still and the TV in the next apartment fades to static, I pretend I can hear a low vibration like a tuning fork somewhere beyond the city, aligning us whether we like it or not. The ending is not tidy because this is not a story that resolves neatly into answers or comfort. It is a living document, a found footage of lives being edited in real time, and what it asks of you, of me, of anyone who has ever felt a memory slip like a coin from a pocket is to pay attention in a way that is both stubborn and tender. Decode the spirals if you can. Keep your photographs safe. And if a stranger leaves you a Polaroid with a small spiral etched into the corner, do not throw it away as a prank. Keep it, fold it into your wallet, and carry it. For reasons we do not yet understand, there is power in being remembered by others. And perhaps that will be enough to keep the hinge from swinging all the way open. Or perhaps the hinge will swing and reveal something that makes us wish for a terrible, intimate second that we had never noticed the spiral at all. The last message in my inbox tonight, from an unknown number that matched none of our threads, read simply, "We have all been watching you. You have finally noticed." It is both accusation and invitation, and the tremor that runs through me when I read it is equal parts dread and something like relief. Because acknowledgement is dangerous, but acknowledgement is also a kind of salvation. The thread remains open. The watchers remain patient. And the only thing we can do now is to keep watching back. I can feel it now, the way the story has been circling me. Not as something I'm telling you, but as something that has been telling itself through me. From the first time. Claire's accent bent into something that did not belong to her from the moment a professor vanished into nothing. From the whisper of a child's voice on the other end of a phone line that never should have rung. There has been a question. Lingering underneath it all, not what happened, but asterisk why it happened and why me. And maybe why you, too, since you're still here, watching. Leaning in closer as though the silence itself is trying to peel back your skin to see what you remember. The strange thing is how memory betrays itself in moments like these. 4 weeks I told myself I had proof. I kept scraps of paper, fragments of audio pulled from corrupted live streams, photographs that should never have developed. I studied them the way a starving man studies crumbs, convincing myself that if I stared long enough, the hidden truth would rise up from the edges. But then I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced that I had dreamed all of it, that Claire was just a woman with an accent, that professors don't vanish, that children don't speak forbidden names through dead phone lines. And yet each morning I defined something I couldn't account for. A door drawn in black ink across my palm. A voice recorder on my desk that played whispers. I never recorded a message, scrawled in handwriting I recognized but could not place. Asterisk, you were right all along. It should have felt like validation, but instead it hollowed me out. Because if I was right, then everything else I had dismissed as paranoia was real. The missing time. The gaps in conversation where friends swore. I repeated myself in languages I don't speak. The way strangers seemed to look at me too long, like they almost recognized me. That's when I understood it was never just Claire. It was never just me. There were others, watching from the edges, waiting for the right moment, when the line between reality and confession blurred so thin it could be torn apart. And when that moment came, I did the only thing I could. I went back to the beginning. I sat down with her speech, the one they erased from the record, the one they claim was lost too, static and I. Listened again. Not the way you listen for meaning, but the way you listen for what hides underneath sound. The way you strain to hear something you're not sure you want to recognize. And I swear to you, beneath her trembling accent, beneath the cadence that did not belong to her, I heard myself. Not my voice, as it is now, but my voice as a child. Broken, terrified, pleading to be remembered. The confession came then, uninvited, heavy as ash on my tongue. I had heard that voice before. Not at the UN, not through Claire, not through corrupted recordings. I had heard it in my own home, Years ago, when I was too young to understand what was happening, it was the same cadence my father used the night he disappeared from our house without explanation. The same fractured accent he begged me not to repeat. In all these years, I buried it, convinced it was trauma, a child's confusion, a nightmare stretched into adulthood. But the body never forgets what the mind tries to bury. It comes back when you least expect it in a stranger's speech, in the laughter of people mocking an accent they don't understand, in the hollow pause before someone vanishes. And so, I sit here now, knowing the truth is not about Claire at all. She was never the source, she was the vessel, the way the voice bled back into the world. And if I'm honest, I fear I am the same. That's the part I never wanted to admit, because once you admit it, the questions sharpen. What if my memories were never mine? What if my accent, my gestures, my very identity were nothing but echoes of something older, something that has been passing itself through us for generations? What if the hidden truth is not that we are haunted by the past, but that the past uses us to stay alive? It is a thought that can destroy you if you let it, and maybe that's the choice. The only one I have left. I could deny it, bury it again, return to the comfort of silence. Convince myself that what happened was nothing but stress, paranoia, the slow collapse of a tired mind. Or I could accept that I am no longer just me, that my voice carries with it something ancient, something forbidden, something that explains why professors vanish mid-sentence, why children speak names no one taught them, why doors appear in dreams and in ink across the palms of the living. But here's the paradox, the part that tears me apart. If I accept it, I lose myself to it. If I deny it, I lose the truth forever. And so I am caught in the middle, asking you to hear this, not as entertainment, not as another unsolved mystery to scroll past, but as a confession, raw and incomplete. Because maybe you've heard it to an echo in someone's voice. A phrase that didn't belong to them, a memory that feels like yours but doesn't fit in your life. If you have, then you know what I'm about to admit. It was never about finding the truth. It was about surviving it. And yet, survival feels like a trick. Because as I write this, as I speak these words, I realize something that stops me cold. If the voice is still speaking through me, if you are still listening, then maybe I was never meant to survive it at all. Maybe the point was to pass it on. That thought should terrify you. Because if I'm right, then you are no longer just a witness, you are part of it now. You have carried it with you the moment you let these words into your mind. And when you hear yourself repeating something in the dark, in a voice you don't recognize, don't ask where it came from. You already know. The room is cold. My hands are shaking. I don't know if I'm still me anymore, or if I've finally become the echo. But I can't stop. I can't end here. Because the last thing I need to tell you, the last thing I must confess, is this. The truth isn't trying to be found. The truth is trying to be remembered. And once it's remembered, it never lets go. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.